Whether it's dolphins, orcas, or simply put marine life, this is all a controversial topic in zoos. But also this title of the video is controversial. But I'm still very much thinking that zoo games should have these animals in. Why? Well, watch this video and you're gonna find out. Okay, let's start with some old zoo games. They all pretty much had marine life in. In fact, the game were actually called Marine Mania, for example, with the Zoo Tycoon 1 expansion pack, and they pretty much didn't really think about what exactly is going to happen with the people playing that game, right? So we've got shows, we've got everything you can think of. I'm very much against this. Times have changed, topics have changed, and fortunately enough, real zoos have changed too. But there is something in there that I want to discuss later in this video, why I'm still pretty much open to having these animals in Planet Zoo. But there is a specific thing I want to first of all discuss with you, and that is the aspect of conservation in a zoo game just in general. Remember this fellow over here? Yeah, I mean many people would agree that polar bears don't really fit into a zoo, and still they were brought into the game right with the first DLC. And remember what happened with the community once they did something specific to the conservation aspect? Yeah, the community went nuts because the requirement of land was too heavy in the game. And this was down to the fact that people say different than they think. And at the end of the day, people wanted to have the polar bear in the game and do with it what they think would be the best to do with it. And all the requirements that Planet Zoo put into were mainly there to raise awareness. And actually, it worked, didn't it? So let's quickly talk about dolphins and orcas and whales and just in general in zoos. Now, I'm from Germany, the western part of Germany, and there is one specific zoo very close to us, which is the Duisburg Zoo. They've had belugas and they've also had dolphins. They still do have all dolphins. And this is a very good example of how zoos changed. Now, obviously, many zoos in the past have been very active in actually capturing animals from the wild and bring them into zoos to showcase them. And I think there is no denial that 100% of the people should now be aware of the fact that this is not going to work anymore and actually should have never happened. But facts are there. These zoos exist and these animals live in there. And before, killing those animals, because you clearly can't get them back into the wild, zoos have changed, Many zoos have changed into being a lot more helpful to conservation than being a problem to this. Now, why is this the case? And I'm fully aware of the fact that many zoos still have a huge problem in so many areas. But there are some zoos that, went full-on conservation and helped a lot of very good causes. In fact, they even helped organizations like PETA and WWF and all these kind of wildlife conservation organizations. They get a huge impact from these zoos because they actively look into conservation. Now, the problem about this is that in order to make people aware, you have to raise awareness in a certain way. And this is what many zoos still do by still having, unfortunately, these animals in a zoo. And most of the animals, for example, in Duisburg, there's simply not a single dolphin existing anymore that was born in the wild. Every single dolphin in there is bred in captivity, which I don't want to dive too much into the fact if that's a good thing in general, but it's very hard to, leave them into the wild. It's nearly impossible. And so it is very important to raise awareness nowadays about the fact why they shouldn't be in captivity, especially not like in the zoos in the past. Now, for example, the Duisburg Zoo and in Nuremberg, these are the two zoos left in Germany that have dolphins in them. I wouldn't say necessarily that their habitats are good, but at least they are way better than they used to be in the past. And they at least started to do some focus or put some focus on that. But what I'm saying is that despite the fact that I really wish they, stop having these animals sooner than later, in a game there is a little bit of a different story about that. And I want to refer back to the polar bear here. Now, polar bears, for me personally, would be as problematic as dolphins, simply because the physics of this animal, let alone, is impossible to bring into a zoo. There's just no way of having them in a zoo, and yet we do have it. But Frontier found a nice way of creating this awareness, whether intentional or not, but by having this really insane requirement for land mass, every single person needed to look into why that was the case. And I guarantee you that at least 40% of the people playing Planet Zoo were not aware of how much land mass requirement a polar bear really needs. And so they get a different understanding of why it is really not the best idea to have a polar bear in the game. Or, well, actually, in the wild in a zoo, because a game is a different story. And I'm going to talk about this now in the next part of this video. So, how would you be able to bring these animals into the game without actually giving people too much of a chance to build tiny spaces in which they put the animals without really thinking about this in the first place? Now, there are a lot of opportunities, but what about having a little bay area in which you need to build a conservational bay area, like a rescue station in which animals can be held to cure them, bring them to the vet, make sure that they are fit again, and then bring them back into the ocean. These things exist. It's nothing that I made up myself. These things exist in the wild. There are some very cool lagoons out there in the Caribbean and in other areas of the world where they specifically try to bring injured animals into that bay, take care of them, and once they, did cure them or they had enough time to, get rid of their injuries or whatnot, they just release them back into the wild. And despite the fact I'm really against any restrictions in a zoo game, as you know, why not have this as a mandatory scenario you have to play? Just imagine putting this as a wall against the Sandbox players so that even the Sandbox players have to play that one specific scenario. I mean, yes, it might be annoying at the first place, but at least you have to think about this, and that would give Frontier the chance to tell the story they want to tell. Imagine they would bring out a DLC with, let's say, some sea turtles and a dolphin and an orca, just to show you some, and let the players build a rescue station for all of those in maybe 3 steps, because obviously orcas and dolphins in the same lagoon would be problematic, I guess. But just have these iterative in a scenario to show the people some aspects about these specific animals. And I think we all agree that these are wonderful animals. Just in general, I would say they have a pretty huge fan base for a very good reason, but they have something to them that makes people really emotional, and there is a reason why there is a dolphin therapy, for example. And I think it would be a very nice chance to have a different interpretation of a game and of, the task that the game also has, the chance that a game can actually be a really helpful education tool for conservation of animals. Now, there is even more to that, because I think if you think more about this, having these animals in a zoo game would give every single person in the world the chance to see these animals interact and, just learn about them without having them in actual zoos. I know it's kind of a bold claim to say that this would replace actual animals in a zoo, but I think it would be better to have them in a proper zoo game that a lot of people play than to, go out to zoos that have the dolphins, because indirectly or directly, however you want to take that, you are supporting the zoo that have the animals in. And that means, if the zoo is not actually connected to one of the larger conservational oriented organizations, which is sometimes not as transparent as it should be, then you might actually pay them to hold even longer on to the programs of dolphins in there. And that's the reason why I haven't been to the Duisburg Zoo for a very long time now, even though I really want to go there. But, I feel bad about this, giving them money for this. So as long as they don't commit to an end to the dolphin program, I think I will try my best to not go there. But, having them in a game would give us the opportunity to play with these animals, focus on their behaviors and just learn more about them. And just to make that very much obvious, I am 100% against any type of show and any type of kind of training other than maybe some, enrichment kind of things, but definitely not a show. We can have that as the show mechanic in the game right now about the educator, but nothing with giving them, something to do for the fans out there, for the people, the guests. That's something I definitely don't want to see, but just give us these animals in a kind of natural bay behavior. What people will do later on in the Sandbox is a different story. Even I would maybe go for an old city zoo, and granted, that's something that has a story to it and just kind of, is part of the history of zoos. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we didn't learn about that. So it's always better to have that bit of education with it. And I would love to see that. So I think it's a perfect moment after the conservation DLC, which obviously shows that Frontier puts a big emphasis on that, to see a marine DLC that has a focus on conservation. And maybe it could be called the, you know, conservation of marine life DLC. Who knows? But that would be beautiful. Anyways, thank you for watching this video. I hope you got my points and I hope you can understand where I'm coming from. I would love to hear your opinion on that topic. Please put it down in the comments. You know, be polite, please. Everyone just wants the best, and don't hate me, you know. I tried to make the point here, and I really would love to jump down into comments and just answer to all of your things. And many thanks as always. If you want to see more of this, more Planet Zoo projects and everything else, click the video to the top right. YouTube decided what you would like best. And now have a good day. Thank you so much. And if you are very generous today, please think about subscribing if you haven't already. Thanks so much. Have a good time and goodbye.